The first time I watched Devlin Marsh try to break a man who was not allowed to break, I was standing 3 feet behind the camera with a battery pack digging into my spine, and I remember thinking, very clearly, that one of these 2 people was going to be humiliated before noon. I was certain I knew which one. I was wrong in a way that cost me everything I thought I wanted, and gave me back something I did not know I had lost. My name is Nell Ashby. For a little under 2 years I was the person who made Devlin Marsh look like a genius. I cut his videos. I chose the frames that flattered him and buried the ones that didn't. I found the exact 1/8 of a second where a stranger's face crumpled, and I froze it, and I sold that flinch to 9 million people who had learned to want it. If you have ever laughed at a clip of some ordinary person getting owned by a man with a ring light and a catchphrase, there is a real chance the person who trimmed the cruelty into something that felt like fun was me. I am not proud of that. I am telling you because the guard at the center of this story never got to speak for himself. Not once, not for weeks, and someone who was in the room for the lie owes it to him to be the one who tells the truth. His name was Tobias Renn. On the morning it began, I did not know his name because to us he was not a person. He was content. He was the statue. He was the perfect mark, and Devlin had been circling him for a month. You have to understand what Devlin was, because the whole thing turns on it. Devlin Marsh had built an audience of 9 million on a single, simple, poisonous idea. That dignity is funny when you take it from someone who can't take it back. His whole channel was ambush. He walked up to waiters, to security guards, to museum attendants, to anyone whose job required them to stay polite and stay put, and he needled them until they either laughed along, which he framed as a win, or lost their temper, which he framed as a bigger win. The clips were fast and loud and edited to within an inch of their lives, scored with that jaunty little sting he made me lay under every punchline. People sent them to each other by the 100,000. The comments called him fearless. Brands called him disruptive. He had a management company, a merchandise line, and a countdown clock in the corner of his office to the day he would hit 10 million, which he intended to celebrate with something, in his words, unforgettable. The Royal Guard was going to be the unforgettable thing. He had been building to it for weeks, teasing his audience with grainy zoom shots of the sentries outside the palace at Harrogate. "You know the rules," he'd say to the lens, walking backward through the forecourt with that grin. "They can't move, they can't talk, they can't touch you, it's not even a fair fight." The idea electrified his followers. Here, at last, was the ultimate version of the only trick he had ever done. A man in a red tunic and a tall bearskin, standing his post in front of the whole world, bound by centuries of discipline to swallow whatever a stranger threw at him. A man forbidden by the very meaning of his uniform to fight back. To Devlin, it was not a monument. It was a piñata that couldn't swing. We arrived at the palace forecourt a little after 10. It was a bright, hard morning, the kind of clean, cold light that made the gilded railings look wet and the stone look bleached. The public were already thick along the black iron fence, tourists 3 deep, phones up, everyone waiting for the ceremony of the changing of the sentries that happened on the hour. Devlin loved a crowd. A crowd was a laugh track that filmed itself. He had 3 of us with him, Pike on the main camera, a big quiet man who would point a lens at anything and feel nothing, Call, the hype man, whose entire job was to stand off frame and make the loud reaction noises that Devlin liked to keep in the edit, and me, on second camera and sound, the one who would later sit in a dark room and decide what all of it meant. The guard we came for stood at the near post, inside a shallow alcove of pale stone, behind a low chain that was the only thing separating him from the crowd. Red wool tunic, brass buttons catching the light in a hard row, white gloves, a black bearskin so tall it seemed to change the weather above his head. His rifle stood at his shoulder. His eyes were fixed on a point across the forecourt that none of us could see, some horizon only he was posted to watch, and his face, I studied that face for weeks afterward, frame by frame, and I can tell you it did not hold contempt or boredom or fear. It held nothing that a camera could sell. It held only the specific, total stillness of a man who has decided, long before you arrived, exactly who he is going to be. Devlin took one look at him and I saw the greed come into his eyes. "Oh," he breathed, half to the lens Pike was already lifting. "Oh, he's perfect." He started small. That was always his method, start where it looks like nothing, so that by the time it is something, the crowd has already decided to be on your side. He stepped up close to the chain, tucked his hands behind his back in a mocking parody of the guard's parade rest, and matched him, chin up, chest out, staring at the same invisible horizon. The tourists chuckled. Pike swung wide to get both of them in the frame, the influencer and the statue, and I knew even as it happened that this was the shot Devlin wanted for the thumbnail. Call made a delighted little O from off to the side. Guardsman Renn did not so much as breathe differently. He was a wall that a fly had landed on. Devlin held the pose until the laughter thinned, because a joke that stops getting laughs is a wound to a man like him, and then he escalated. He leaned in over the chain, close enough that his breath must have touched the guard's face, and he started to talk. Low, fast, wheedling the patter he'd used on 100 marks. "Come on, big man, little smile. Nobody has to know. You blink for me, we're done, I swear. You're telling me you feel nothing. Somebody's in there. Give us a wave. One wave and I'll leave, promise." On and on, a river of it, each sentence pitched to find the crack, and all the while Pike's lens hunted the guard's face for the twitch that would be the whole video. There was no twitch. There was a man, and there was the noise a smaller man makes at him, and the two things did not touch. I want to be honest about what I felt in that first hour, because the lie I later helped tell depended on people not knowing what I knew. Standing there, I did not feel like I was watching a comedy. I felt the way you feel in a museum when someone is too loud, a hot, crawling embarrassment that had nowhere to go. The guard's stillness was not the stillness of a target. It was the stillness of something with a great deal of weight in it, the way a bell is still until it isn't. Devlin was not attacking a man who couldn't fight back. He was throwing himself, over and over, against a discipline so much older and heavier than he was that it did not even register the impact. And some animal part of me understood, an hour before my clever part would admit it, that in any true accounting Devlin was the one being exposed. But my clever part had a job. So when Call caught my eye and grinned and mouthed "gold," I nodded, and I kept my second camera trained on the crowd, gathering the reactions I would need, the laughing faces, the phones, the pointing, all the raw material of a moment going viral in real time. The changing of the sentries began on the hour. A column came across the forecourt in slow, immaculate time, boots striking the stone in a single sound, and the crowd pressed forward against the fence to watch. This was ceremony older than Devlin's whole country of 9 million followers, a thing that had meant something to people for longer than anyone alive could remember, and Devlin saw in it only an obstacle to his content and an audience he had not yet made laugh. He did the thing that, watching it back later, I could not stop watching. He stepped over the low chain. Not far, a single stride, one polished sneaker planting itself on the guard's side of the line, into the shallow ground the sentry was posted to hold. It was a small trespass and an enormous one. A murmur went through the nearest tourists. Call's face lit up, and Guardsman Renn, for the first time, moved. It was not what Devlin wanted. It was not a flinch or a snap or a lunge for the camera to feast on. The guard brought his rifle down from his shoulder in one clean, unhurried motion, and he stamped, a single hard crash of his boot against the stone that went through the forecourt like a struck anvil, and in a voice that was not loud but was built out of some deeper register than shouting, a voice that expected to be obeyed because it always had been, he said 4 words. "Make way for the guard." That was all. It was the formula, the old challenge, the thing a sentry is permitted to say when his post is crossed. He did not touch Devlin. He did not even look at him, not really. His eyes stayed forward, and the words were for the space, for the ceremony coming across the stone, not for the man. But something in the sound of it, the certainty in it, the sense of 1,000 men behind him who had said the same 4 words on the same stones, made Devlin Marsh step back over the chain without deciding to. His body obeyed before his ego could stop it. I saw it. Pike's camera saw it. For one instant, on that bright, cold morning, 9 million followers' hero was just a man who had been told to move and had moved. If Devlin had been anyone else, that would have been the end of it, and it would have been a funny, humbling little story he told against himself. But Devlin Marsh had never in his life let a camera see him lose. And I watched, standing there with the cold coming up through my boots, as he took that flash of humiliation and turned it, right in front of me, into a plan. He recovered his grin. He turned it on the lens. "Okay," he said, bright and easy, as if he'd meant all of it. "Okay, he's tougher than the last one. We'll come back." He drew a finger across his throat at Pike, cut, and he steered us out through the crowd with his hand light on my shoulder, and under his breath, only for me, he said the sentence that started everything that came after. "That's a challenge video," he said. "We don't stop until he breaks. And Nell, whatever he does, we keep the camera on him and we make sure the edit tells them who the bad guy is." I said okay. God help me, I said okay, and I meant it, because at that moment I still believed the story would be ours to tell. I did not yet know Tobias Renn's name. I would learn it 3 weeks later, in a corridor of the palace, from a woman with gray at her temples and a bearing that made me stand up straighter without deciding to, who would look at what I had done and ask me one question that I have never stopped answering. But I am getting ahead of the ambush. Let me take you back to the forecourt, because the truth of what happened there, the whole truth, the parts Devlin cut and the parts he kept, is the only thing I have that is worth giving anyone. He built a lie 9 million people believed. I helped him build it. And the strange, hard grace of what came after is that the same footage that made the lie was the thing that finally, completely, destroyed it. Because a camera, unlike an editor, does not know how to leave out the part where a man everyone had been taught to hate turns out to be the only reason a small girl went home to her mother. That morning, though, none of that had happened yet. That morning there was only a bright forecourt, a statue in red, a man with a ring light, and me, holding a camera, choosing what the world would be allowed to see. We came back 4 days later, and Devlin had done his homework. In the time between, he had watched the footage until he had the guard's whole world mapped. He knew the ceremony ran on the hour. He knew the guard could challenge a man who crossed the chain but could not pursue him, could not leave his post, was bound to the few square feet of stone he was posted to hold. He knew, and this is the thing that should have warned me if I had been the kind of person who let herself be warned, that the guard's discipline was not a weakness to be exploited, but a set of rules the guard would obey even when obeying them cost him. Devlin did not see honor. He saw a rulebook he could game. To him, the guard's code was just the terms of the contest, and he had found, he thought, the exploit. The exploit was this: he would never again cross the chain himself. He would make the guard the one who moved. He would engineer a moment, messy, loud, ambiguous, in which the man in red would have to choose between his stillness and something else, and whatever the guard chose, Devlin would have Pike's lens on his face and me in the dark room afterward, deciding what it meant. If the guard stood still while something went wrong, Devlin would cut it to look like cold cruelty. If the guard moved, Devlin would cut it to look like violence. Heads I win, tails you lose. It was, I understood much later, the same trick as all his videos, just aimed at a better man. He had spent his whole career proving that an ordinary person, filmed selectively, could be made to look like anything. Now he was going to prove it against the most disciplined man any of us had ever seen. And he was so sure of the machine we had built that it did not occur to him he might be filming his own undoing. The first of the engineered videos was the one about the water. It was a simple, ugly little idea, and it worked. which is the worst thing you can say about an idea like that. Devlin brought a cheap plastic cup and filled it at a public fountain, and he stood at the chain in front of Guardsman Renn, and he talked to the crowd about how hot the day was, how these poor men baked in their wool and their fur, how somebody ought to help. And then, in a gesture that read to the crowd as almost kind, he lifted the cup toward the guard's face as if to offer him a drink, and let it slip, so that the water went down the front of the red tunic in a dark stain, and the cup bounced off the guard's boot. Renn did not move. Water ran off his chin. His eyes held their horizon, and the crowd, which a second earlier had been half on Devlin's side because he'd framed it as concern, made a sound of pure discomfort because they had all seen that he had done it on purpose, and they had all seen the guard take it without a flicker, and the contrast made Devlin, not the guard, look small. That should have been a losing video. In the real world, filmed honestly, it was a man humiliating himself. But I want you to understand exactly how the machine worked, because it is the machine, and not Devlin, that is the true villain of what I did. I took that footage into my dark room, and over 11 hours I remade it. I cut the moment where Devlin's wrist flicked the cup, 3 frames, gone, and now the spill was an accident. I found 2 seconds where Renn's jaw tightened against the cold water, and I slowed them down and pushed the contrast until an ordinary muscle looked like a threat, like a man barely holding back rage. I pulled calls off camera. Whoa, he did not like that up in the mix and buried the crowd's uncomfortable murmur down under the music. I built out of true footage a false thing, a video in which a kind young man offers water to an overheated guard, fumbles it by accident, and is met with barely contained fury from a so-called symbol of discipline, who clearly thinks he's above the people he serves. That was the caption I wrote. Above the people he serves. I remember being pleased with it. It went out at 6 in the evening, and it had 4 million views by breakfast. The comments were a flood, and they were exactly what Devlin had ordered. People who had never stood on that forecourt, who had never seen the ceremony or felt the weight of those 4 old words, decided in their thousands that they knew Tobias Renn. They called him arrogant. They called him a coward hiding behind a costume. They said the monarchy was rotten, and here was the proof, a pampered toy soldier sneering at a boy who tried to give him water. A few said it looked staged, said something was off about the cut, and I watched those comments get buried under a landslide of the ones that felt good. That is the thing nobody tells you about the machine. It does not run on lies. It runs on the fact that a comfortable lie is heavier than an uncomfortable truth, and it always sinks to the bottom, carrying the truth down with it. Devlin was ecstatic. He took me to dinner, which he never did, and he told me I was an artist, and he outlined the next 4 videos, each one crueler and more clearly designed than the last, all of them building toward the 10 million launch. He had discovered that the guard was not just a good mark, but the best mark he had ever found, because the guard's own discipline did the work for us. Every time Renn refused to react, we could sell that refusal as arrogance. His honor was the raw material of his disgrace. Devlin thought that was the funniest thing in the world. I laughed along, but I had started by then to do a thing I could not stop doing, which was to watch the raw footage, the real footage, before I ruined it late at night, alone, after the edit was done. I told myself it was craft, that I was studying the guard to exploit him better. That was a lie too, but it was a lie I told only to myself, so at least it hurt only me. The truth was that Tobias Renn had begun to trouble me the way a true thing troubles a person who has built a life out of false ones. In the raw footage he was so completely himself. Water ran down his face and he did not wipe it. A man he could have crushed with one hand insulted his mother, his king, his uniform, and he held his horizon and gave the man nothing, not even the dignity of being noticed. I had spent 2 years making people flinch for money, and here was a man who would not flinch for anything, and the longer I looked at him, the more clearly I understood that he was not the joke. I was. The videos kept coming. Over 3 weeks, Devlin ran the whole ugly catalog at Guardsman Renn, and I cut every one of them into a weapon. He staged an argument with a bystander, really tall in a rented jacket, right at the guard's post, a shoving match designed to look like it was spilling toward the sentry, so that when Renn's rifle came off his shoulder to challenge the disturbance, we could cut it to look as if the guard had gone after a member of the public. He hired an actor to sit near the chain in a wheelchair, and then edited the footage so that the guard's stillness read as ignoring a man in distress, too proud to even look at a disabled veteran, when in truth the man had been placed there by us, and the guard had, in the raw footage I watched at 2 in the morning, quietly signaled a nearby officer to check on him. Devlin cut the signal. I cut the signal. That is the one I still cannot forgive, because it took a small act of care and buried it and sold its opposite to 5 million people. Each video did better than the last. The audience had learned to want Renn's downfall the way they once wanted the waiters, the security guards, the museum attendants, and Devlin fed them. And the comments grew crueler, and somewhere out there, though I did not think about it, because thinking about it was not my job, a real man in a real uniform was becoming, in the mind of a country, a villain he had never been, for the crime of doing his duty in front of the wrong camera. The palace said nothing. That was the thing that unsettled Devlin. In the rare moments anything unsettled him. Any other mark would have posted a response, filed a complaint, hired a lawyer, given him the reaction that was oxygen to the whole enterprise. The palace at Harrogate did not. The guards changed on the hour. The ceremony ran as it had run for centuries. Guardsman Renn stood his post, the same post, we noticed. They did not even move him, did not hide him, did not concede by so much as an inch that anything was wrong. And that silence, which Devlin read as weakness, was the first thing that should have frightened him, because a man who does not answer a lie is not always a man who cannot. Sometimes he is a man who is waiting for the lie to finish saying everything it needs to say, so that the truth, when it comes, has somewhere clean to land. I met Guardsman Renn's eyes exactly once during those 3 weeks. It was the end of a shoot, the crowd breaking up, Pike packing the camera, Devlin already scrolling his numbers. I was coiling a cable near the chain, and I looked up, and the guard was looking at me. Not at Devlin, who was performing for the phones. At me. At the woman with the second camera, the quiet one, the one who was always watching the crowd instead of the show. And I understood in that half-second before I made myself look away that he knew. He knew exactly what I did in the dark room. He knew that of all of us I was the one who took the true thing and made it false, and he was not angry, which would have been bearable. He was something much worse. He looked at me the way you look at someone you are sorry for. Then his eyes went back to the horizon, and I never forgot it. And 3 days later Devlin filmed the video that crossed the line, the real line, the one you cannot edit your way back across, and everything changed. I need to tell it exactly, because the world got it wrong for 11 days, and I am the reason it did. The 10th of the month was a Saturday, and Devlin wanted a crowd, and he got one. The forecourt was packed for the hour ceremony, tourists at the fence 4 and 5 deep, families, a whole restless press of people with their phones up. He had planned his biggest stunt yet, the one meant to be the centerpiece of the 10 million countdown, and it involved a prop he was very proud of. A lightweight camera crane, a long articulated arm on a wheeled base that Pike could swing out over the heads of the crowd to get a sweeping shot down onto the guard from above. It was aluminum, and it looked flimsy, and it was heavier than it looked, and Devlin had not paid anyone who knew how to rig it, because Devlin never paid for anything he thought he could fake. The plan was simple, and it was cruel. Call in the crowd would start a chant the guard's name, twisted into a taunt the audience had invented online, and get the crowd pushing forward against the fence and the chain, a wall of noise and bodies leaning in at the sentry, while Pike swung the crane out over them for the money shot. The lone man in red, an island of red stillness in a sea of jeering faces, the ultimate thumbnail for the ultimate video. Devlin would stand at the front narrating it all. And whatever Renn did hold, and look like a heartless statue above a suffering crowd, or move, and look like a soldier turning on civilians, we would have it, and I would make it mean whatever we needed. What Devlin did not plan for, because Devlin never planned for anything real, was that a crowd is not a comment section. A crowd has weight. When call started the chant and the front ranks surged, the whole mass of people lurched toward the fence, and the wheeled base of the crane, parked too close, on cobblestones that sloped a hand's breadth toward the guard's post, began to roll. I saw it before anyone. That was my curse, and it turned out the one thing I did right. I was always watching the edges of the frame, and the edge of the frame was where it started. The crane's base slipped its brake and rolled 2 feet, and the long aluminum arm, unbalanced with Pike's heavy rig on the end and no counterweight worth the name, swung down and outward in a slow, sickening arc, straight over the low chain, straight toward the front rank of the crowd pressed against the fence at the guard's post. And at the very front of that rank, right at the chain, where a small person could slip to when a big crowd pushes, there was a little girl. She could not have been more than 6. She had gotten separated from her mother in the surge. I learned all of this later, in the calm rooms where the truth was finally assembled, squeezed forward by the press of legs, until she was at the very front, both hands on the low chain, her face turned up in delight at the man in the tall fur hat, utterly unaware that 100 pounds of aluminum and steel was scything down out of the sky toward the exact spot where she stood. Everyone else was looking at the guard. That was the whole design of the video. Devlin had spent 3 weeks teaching a country to look at the guard. So the crowd looked at the guard, and the phones looked at the guard, and no one, not Pike, not Call, not Devlin, not one of the hundreds of people in that forecourt, saw the little girl beneath the falling arm. Except the guard. Tobias Renn was the one person in that forecourt whose entire life had trained him to watch the whole field at once, to see the edge of the frame while everyone else stared at the center. He saw the crane slip. He saw the arm come down. He saw the child at the chain. And he did the thing his whole discipline forbade, the thing 3 weeks of my videos had insisted he was too proud and too cold to ever do. He left his post. He did not hesitate. There was no visible decision. One instant he was the statue, the island of red, and the next he had dropped his rifle, dropped it, let his weapon fall to the stone, which is a thing a guard is never permitted to do, a thing that in the old codes is close to a sin. And he was moving 3 long strides, faster than a man that size and that much will should be able to move, and he crossed his own chain going the other way, out toward the crowd, out toward the girl, and the aluminum arm came down and he got there. He got there. He put his own body between the falling rig and the child, one white glove sweeping her back off the chain and into the crowd where hands caught her, his other arm and his shoulder and the whole broad wall of his back taking the crane's arm as it fell. It struck him across the shoulders and the back of the neck below the bearskin, and he went down to one knee on the cobblestones, and the heavy rig crashed to the stone beside him where the girl had been standing a half-second before, and it was over that fast. 3 seconds, maybe 4. The child was in the crowd, crying, unhurt, already being lifted toward a screaming woman fighting forward through the press. And Guardsman Renn was down on one knee on the stone with 100 pounds of broken equipment beside him, and a red welt already rising on his neck. And he had saved her, completely, at the cost of his post and his rifle and his flawless record, and as it turned out, the skin of his own back. And the only thing anyone with a camera had captured was the last 2 seconds. The part where a guard in a red tunic came charging over the chain into a crowd of civilians, and a man went down and there was screaming. You have to see how it looked in those 2 seconds to a lens that had missed everything before them. It looked like the guard had snapped. It looked like the arrogant, barely contained statue we had spent 3 weeks inventing had finally lost his temper and charged the crowd. It looked, in Pike's footage, exactly like the video Devlin had been trying to manufacture for a month, the soldier turning on the people, except this time we hadn't had to manufacture it, because reality had, we thought, handed it to us for free. Devlin knew what he had before the girl had stopped crying. I watched it happen on his face. There was a flash of something. Even Devlin, I want to believe, felt the floor of the thing for one instant, and then the flash was gone, and in its place was the greed, purer and brighter than I had ever seen it, because he understood that he was holding the 10 million video in his hands. "Did you get it?" he was saying low and fast to Pike. "Tell me you got it. Tell me the camera was on him." And Pike, who felt nothing, nodded, and Devlin turned, and I saw him arrange his own face into shock and outrage for the phones that were already turning toward him, and he began, right there, 10 feet from the child he had nearly killed, to narrate the lie. "He attacked them," Devlin said to the crowd, to the lenses, his voice cracking with a grief he did not feel. "Did everyone see that? He charged the crowd. There are families here. There are children. This is what they are. This is what's under the costume." And the terrible thing, the thing that still wakes me, is that the crowd believed him. Not all of them, but enough. Because a crowd that has been pushed and frightened and is full of adrenaline does not know what it saw. It knows only that there was a surge and a crash and a man in a uniform on the ground in the middle of it. And here was a familiar voice telling them what it meant. And it is so much easier to be told than to know. By the time officers reached the post, by the time a supervisor got the crane off the stone and the crowd back from the fence, the story had already set. The guard had lost control. The guard had charged, and Devlin Marsh had it all on camera. They helped Renn to his feet. He did not resist, and he did not explain. I noticed that even then, through my own racing calculations. He did not say a word in his own defense, did not point at the crane or the girl or the crowd, did not do the one thing that would have saved him, which was to speak. He let 2 officers take his arms. He looked for one moment back at the spot on the cobblestones where the child had stood, as if to be sure, as if the only fact he needed confirmed was that she was gone from it and safe. And then he let them lead him away with his bearskin still perfect on his head, and his rifle recovered and carried behind him, and the welt burning red on his neck, and the phones filmed him go, and the caption wrote itself, "The guard who charged the crowd." We went back to the studio, and I did not sleep for 2 days. Devlin wanted the video out that night. He wanted it out while the forecourt footage was hot, while the crowd's own shaky phone clips were already spreading and confirming his version, while the momentum was his. He gave me Pike's footage and calls and 3 angles pulled off the internet from tourists' phones, and he gave me the caption and the music sting and the thumbnail he wanted. Renn mid-stride over the chain, one glove out, face set, made to look like fury, and he told me to have it cut by midnight, and he went home to prepare his response. The tearful one where he'd talk about how shaken he was, how something had to be done, how he'd only ever wanted to make people laugh. And I sat in the dark room in front of the footage, and for the first time in 2 years, I could not do my job. Because I had the raw files, all of them, every camera we ran and Devlin's phone and calls dumped onto my drives the way they always were, unedited, unlovely, complete. And I had watched them the way I always did before I ruined them, and the raw files did not show what Devlin was selling. The raw files, when you had the whole thing and not the last 2 seconds, showed a crane slipping its brake. They showed an arm falling. They showed, at the edge of Pike's own frame in the instant before he swung the camera down, a small pale shape at the chain that was a little girl. And then they showed the only man in the forecourt who was watching the edges see her, and drop his weapon, and run the wrong way across his own line to put his body where the steel was going to be. My second camera, the one Devlin forgot about, the one that had been trained on the crowd for reactions, always on the crowd, that was my whole assignment. My second camera had caught it dead center. Clean. Wide, the whole of it. The slip, the fall, the child, the guard, the save. 4 seconds of the truest thing I had ever recorded, sitting on my drive, while my other 3 monitors showed me the lie I had been ordered to build out of the same 4-second scene from a crueler angle. I want to tell you I refused immediately. I didn't. I'm trying to be honest, And the honest thing is that I sat in that room for a long time doing the arithmetic of my own life. 9 million followers. The launch. My name in the credits Devlin never gave anyone. The apartment I could suddenly afford, the work I had spent 2 years learning to do, the only thing I had ever been good at, which was making the true thing serve the false one. To release what my second camera had caught was to end Devlin Marsh, and Devlin Marsh was my whole world. And a coward's voice in me said that maybe I was wrong, maybe I'd seen it wrong, maybe the safe thing, the reasonable middle thing, was to just cut the video Devlin wanted and say nothing and let the world sort it out. I sat there until 3 in the morning with my hand on the drive that held the truth, and I did the reasonable, cowardly, middle thing. I cut the video Devlin wanted. That is the part I have to say plainly, because everything people got right about me later depends on their knowing this. I did not do the right thing when it was easy. I did it when it was almost too late, and only after I had already done the wrong one. At 3 in the morning I finished the lie. I built the whole poisonous thing, the charge, the fury, the this is what's under the costume, the thumbnail, the sting, and I exported it, and I sent it to Devlin's account queued to go live at 7. And I told myself I was just keeping my options open, and I went home, and I did not sleep, because a thing had woken up in me that I had spent 2 years and 9 million followers teaching myself not to have, and it would not lie back down. The video went live at 7. By 9 it had 8 million views. By noon it had passed 20, the biggest thing Devlin had ever made, and the country came apart over it. For 11 days, the lie won. I need you to sit with that because we tell these stories as though the truth is a thing that arrives on time. It is not. The truth is slow and the lie is fast, and for 11 days the fast thing had the whole field to itself. By the second day it was not just Devlin's audience. The clip jumped the fence into the wider world, onto the news programs, into the mouths of people who had never heard of Devlin Marsh, and it carried his caption with it. The guard who charged the crowd. Commentators who had spent their careers with reasonable voices played the 2 seconds, always the 2 seconds, never a frame before, and asked grave questions about the temperament of the men who guard the palace, about whether the old ceremony had become a danger, about what kind of man hides behind a bearskin and a rifle and then turns on families. A politician I will not dignify called for an inquiry. A newspaper ran the thumbnail I had built, the one with Renn mid-stride and his glove out, under a headline about a monarchy out of touch with the people it looms over. The little girl was mentioned everywhere and understood nowhere. In the lie she was a child, a brutal guard had nearly crushed in his rage, and no one asked the only question that mattered, which was who had put 100 pounds of unrigged steel over her head in the first place. And the palace again said nothing. The guards changed on the hour, but Tobias Renn was not among them. On the third day I saw in a small line at the bottom of a news story that the guardsman at the center of the incident had been relieved of ceremonial duty pending a full inquiry. Relieved of duty. Because of me. Because of the video I had built and queued and sent. The man who had dropped his rifle to save a child was now a suspect in his own heroism, standing before some board of officers, forbidden even to guard the post he had bled for, while the man who had nearly killed the girl sold merchandise about it. Because Devlin sold merchandise about it. That is the detail that finally broke something in me, if you want to know the exact hinge of it. On the 4th day, riding the biggest wave of his life, Devlin launched the 10 million celebration he had been building toward all along, and the centerpiece, the thing he was most proud of, the thing he showed me with shining eyes, was a line of shirts. Red shirts. A cartoon of a scowling guard in a bearskin, and under it, in the jaunty font of his whole brand, a single word, STATUES. As in, that's all they are. As in, look what I made the country believe. He sold 40,000 of them in a day. He got a sponsorship from a company that had turned him down twice before. He booked a live event, a stadium, to celebrate hitting the number, and he wanted me to cut the highlight reel, the greatest hits, And of course the crown jewel of the reel, the closer, the one that had made him untouchable, was the guard who charged the crowd. He was happier than I had ever seen a human being. He had taken a man's honor and a child's terror and a country's trust, and he had turned all three into money and a number, and he was happy. And I sat across from him at the dinner he bought to celebrate, and I understood with a calm that surprised me that I was going to destroy him. I want to be careful here, because I am not the hero of this. The hero of this dropped his rifle on the 4th of the month and never said a word in his own defense. I am only the person who, very late and very frightened, and with the reasonable cowardly middle thing already done and live and making millions, finally turned the camera around. I still had the raw files. Devlin never thought about the raw files. To him they were garbage, the ore you throw away once you've pulled the gold. But I had never deleted a raw file in my life, some instinct of the craft, and on my drives under a folder named so dully that no one would ever open it, sat the whole of the 4th of the month. My second camera, wide and clean and centered on the crowd because that was my job. The crane's break, the falling arm, the girl at the chain. And Tobias Renn seeing her when no one else on earth was looking, and dropping his weapon, and running the wrong way to save a stranger's daughter, and taking the steel across his own back so that she would not. 4 seconds of God's honest truth, and the whole weight of the lie sitting on top of it, and me the only person alive who knew both things were the same event. I did not go to Devlin. There was no version of that conversation that ended with the truth getting out. I knew the man. I knew he would delete every copy he could reach and bury me in lawyers and frame my leaving as a bitter fired employee's revenge. And I knew that if the truth came from me, from his editor, the machine would find a way to make even the truth look like a lie. The machine was very good at that. I had helped build it to be good at that. So I did the only thing I could think of that the machine could not eat. I took the raw footage, not my cut, not a caption, not a sting, not one frame of my touch on it, the raw camera file exactly as it recorded, the whole 4 seconds and the minute on either side so no one could accuse me of trimming. And on the 11th day I carried it, on a single drive in my coat pocket, to the gates of the palace at Arrogance, and I asked to speak to whoever was in charge of the inquiry into Guardsman Tobias Renn. I did not expect to get past the gate. I expected to be turned away, or handled, or told to submit it through some channel where it would drown. What I did not expect was the woman who came down to the small stone room where they had put me to wait, gray at her temples, plainly dressed, with a stillness in her that I recognized instantly because I had spent 3 weeks filming it on a younger man. She did not introduce herself with any title. She sat down across the small table and she looked at me for a long moment, the way Renn had looked at me across the chain, and she said, "You are the one who made the videos." It was not a question. I said yes. "Why are you here?" I put the drive on the table between us. My hand was shaking. "Because I have the whole of it," I said, "and you have only been shown the end." She did not touch the drive. She kept her eyes on me, and she asked me the question I told you at the beginning that I have never stopped answering. She asked, "And what did it cost you to bring it?" I did not understand at first what she meant. I started to say something about my job, about Devlin, about the risk, and she raised one hand gently and stopped me, and I understood that she was not asking about the price I would pay. She was asking whether I had understood yet what the truth was worth, whether I had brought it because it was useful to me now, or because it was true. And I found, to my own surprise, that I could not lie to her, that some part of me had come to that stone room precisely so that I could finally, for once, be a person who did not lie. "Everything," I said. "It costs me everything." And I did it anyway, and I did it 11 days too late. And a man stood in front of your inquiry for 11 days while I decided whether my life was worth more than his honor. So I am not here to be thanked. I am here because I built the lie and I am the only one who can unbuild it, and I would like, once in my life, to have made a thing that is true. The woman with gray at her temples looked at me for a long moment. Then she picked up the drive. Her name, I learned as she stood, was Adela. She was the king's sister, and she was the one who had insisted, over the council of men who wanted the whole matter to quietly go away, that no guardsman of that house would be condemned on 2 seconds of a stranger's video without the house first seeing every second there was to see. She had been fighting for 11 days to hold the inquiry open against a country screaming for it to close. She had been waiting, though she could not have known it, for a coward with a drive in her coat pocket to finally become brave. "You will stay," Princess Adela said at the door. It was not an invitation. It had the same register as 4 words I had heard on a cold forecourt 3 weeks before, the certainty of a person who expects to be obeyed because what she is asking is right. "You will stay, and you will tell the inquiry in your own voice exactly what you have told me. The man you helped condemn will be in the room. You will say it to his face." I said I would, and for the first time in 2 years, saying yes did not feel like the beginning of a lie. The inquiry met the next morning in a long paneled room I was not important enough to know the name of. It was nothing like the machine I came from. There were no lights, no music, no thumbnails. There were officers of the household, grave men in dark uniforms. There was a recorder that took down every word plainly and without a sting. There was Princess Adela at the head of the table, and beside her, arrived that morning and saying little, a younger man I knew from 100 images I had never had cause to look at closely, Crown Prince Rowan, the king's heir, who had asked, I was told, to sit the inquiry himself, because a guardsman of his house had been called a brute before the whole country, and the crown does not send a servant to answer that. And at the far end of the room, standing, he would not sit. They offered and he would not, was Guardsman Tobias Renn. He was in a plain dark coat, not the red, because they had taken the red from him for the duration of the inquiry, and without the bearskin he was just a man, tall and still, with a fading yellow bruise along the side of his neck where the crane had come down. He looked at me when I came in. The same look, not hatred. Sorrow, and under the sorrow, something I had not earned and did not deserve, and have spent the years since trying to become worthy of, which was a kind of patience, as though he had known that eventually the edge of the frame would come forward and tell what it had seen. Princess Adela had them play Devlin's video first. The lie in full, my cut, my caption, my sting, the 20 million view version on a plain screen in a silent room, with the man it had condemned standing 10 feet away watching himself be turned into a monster. It was the hardest thing I have ever sat through. Every choice I had made in the dark room played out in front of the people best equipped on earth to see it for what it was, the 3 frames I'd cut, the 2 seconds I'd kept, the music I'd used to tell them how to feel. And when it ended, there was a silence in that room that Devlin, who fed on silence, would not have been able to bear, and that I forced myself to bear, because I had made the thing and the least I could do was not look away from it. Then Princess Adela said, "Now the other." And they played mine, the raw one. My second camera, the one Devlin forgot, wide and clean and centered on the crowd. There was no music, there was no caption, there was no cut. There was only the forecourt as it had been, the surge, the chant, and then at the edge and then the center, the crane's base slipping its brake, the long arm swinging down, and a small pale shape at the chain that resolved, as the footage ran, into a little girl with both hands on the low chain and her face turned up in delight, alone under 100 pounds of falling steel that every soul in that forecourt was too busy watching the guard to see. Except the guard. The room watched Tobias Renn see her. You could find the exact instant, his eyes, forward on his horizon, catch the movement at the edge, the almost imperceptible change in a face that 3 weeks of my videos had sworn could feel nothing. And then the weapon leaving his hands, dropped, falling, a guardsman's rifle striking the stone, and the man himself already moving, 3 strides, the wrong way across his own line, out over the chain into the crowd. one white glove sweeping the girl back into a forest of arms as the arm of the crane came down, and he turned his own back into it and took it and went to his knee on the cobblestones where, a half-second before, a child had been standing. The footage kept running because I had not cut it, because I had brought all of it. It showed the girl safe in the crowd. It showed a woman reaching her. It showed Renn on one knee with the wreck of the rig beside him, and it showed, and this is the part that undid the room, the part no editor would ever have left in because it does nothing for the pacing. It showed him, before he let the officers take him, turn his head once to look at the empty stone where she had stood, to be sure it was empty, to be sure she was up and gone and safe. That was the only thing he checked. Not the crowd, not the cameras, not his own record dying in front of him. He checked that the stone was empty, and then he let them lead him away. The footage ended. The room was silent again, but it was a different silence, the silence after a true thing instead of the silence after a cruel one. Crown Prince Renn was the first to speak. He had been very quiet through both films, and when he spoke his voice was low and not quite steady, and he did not speak to the officers. He spoke to Renn, down the length of the room. "You dropped your rifle," he said. "Yes, sir," said Guardsman Renn. They were the first words I had ever heard him say that were not the four on the forecourt. "You know what that costs a man in your position. The board could have broken you for it, whatever else was true. You knew that standing there. You knew that if you moved, they would say exactly what they did say." The Crown Prince's jaw worked. "You had 11 days to tell anyone in this house what that footage would show. You said nothing." "Why?" And Tobias Renn said the thing that I have carried with me ever since, the thing that finally taught me the difference between the man I had filmed and the men I had made careers out of ambushing. "Because a guard does not defend himself, sir," he said. "He defends. If I had spent those 11 days shouting that I was innocent, I would have been a man protecting his own name. That is not what the uniform is for. The child was safe. That was the duty, and it was done. The rest is only my honor, and my honor is not worth more than the truth taking its own time to arrive." He paused, and for the first and only time his eyes moved to me at the side of the room, and there was no accusation in them, only that terrible patience. I trusted that someone who saw the whole of it would find they could not carry the weight of only having shown the end. I was made to stand and wait, so I stood and I waited. I have replayed that sentence 10,000 times. He had known. Not that it would be me, not by name, but he had known that a lie built out of a true thing leaves the true thing lying somewhere, waiting, and that a person who has seen the whole of it cannot, in the end, live easily having shown only the end. He had staked his honor and his career, and 11 days of a country's contempt on the possibility that one of the people who ruined him still had a conscience buried under the machinery. He had been right. Barely 11 days too late, but right. Princess Adela turned to me then, and she asked me to tell the inquiry, in my own voice, exactly what I had done. And I did. I did not soften it. I told them about the water and the 3 frames I cut. I told them about the man in the wheelchair and the signal for help that I had buried. I told them that Devlin had planned every stunt to be ambiguous so that the guard's discipline could be sold as its opposite, and that I was the one who did the selling, that the edits were mine, the caption above the people he serves was mine, the thumbnail was mine, the whole grammar of the lie was mine. I told them that on the night of the 4th I had sat in a dark room with the truth in my hand and cut the lie anyway, and cued it, and sent it, because I had been afraid to lose my life, and that a man had stood in front of them for 11 days because of my cowardice. I told it to Renn's face, because Princess Adela had told me I would, and because I had come to understand that saying it to his face was the only apology that was not itself another performance. When I finished, no one rushed to comfort me, and I was grateful for that. Cheap forgiveness would have been just another edit. The room let my words stand as plainly as it had let the footage stand. Then Crown Prince Renn asked the question that turned the inquiry into something larger than one guardsman's name. "This footage," he said, "the whole of it, Does it still exist in a form that cannot be doctored? Because I will tell you what will happen if we simply restore this man to his post and say nothing. The country has seen 2 seconds 20 million times. They will not unsee it because a palace releases a statement. The lie is faster than we are. He looked at me. He had understood better than the officers exactly what I was and exactly what that made me useful for. You built the thing that convinced them. Can you build the thing that unconvinces them? Not a lie in the other direction. The truth, told as well as you told the lie. And I understood that I was being offered the only redemption that would ever mean anything to a person like me. Not to be forgiven, but to be put to work. To take the machine I had spent 2 years learning, the machine that made comfortable lies heavier than uncomfortable truths, and, for once, run it in reverse. I said I could, and this time when I said yes, it was a promise instead of a surrender. They gave me a small room in the palace, a plain screen and the raw files, and they gave me one instruction that came, I was told, from the king himself, who had followed the whole matter and had said only one thing about how the truth should be told, that it was not to be a weapon. King Alaric's word, relayed to me by Princess Adela, was this: "We will not do to the young man what he did to my guardsmen. Show them what happened. Do not tell them how to hate." A truth that has to teach people to hate is only another lie wearing better clothes. I wrote that on a card and I put it above the screen, and I did not take it down until I was finished. It was the hardest cut of my life, because everything I knew how to do was the wrong thing to do. Every instinct I had spent 2 years sharpening, the sting under the punchline, the frozen flinch, the caption that told you whom to despise, I had to set down one by one and work without. I built the truth the way Renn had stood his post, plainly, completely, and without defending itself. I did not caption it "the guard who saved the child," because that was still me telling them what to feel. I simply let the whole of my second camera run, the raw 4 seconds and the minute on either side, with only 2 small helps for an audience that had been trained to look at the center. At the moment the crane slipped its brake, a single quiet circle drawn once around the falling arm, and at the moment before it fell, a single quiet circle around the small pale shape at the chain that everyone had been too busy to see. That was all. No music, no voice, no thumbnail of a scowling man. I titled it with 6 words that were not a caption but a fact, what the cameras were not watching. Princess Adela and Crown Prince Rowan watched it once, in silence, and when it ended the Crown Prince said, "Release it," and the house put it out not on Devlin's machine, but on its own plain channels, the same quiet channels that had said nothing for 11 days, so that when they finally spoke, the silence itself became part of the meaning. Then the truth got to find out how fast it could go. It was slower than the lie at first. Truth always is. For a few hours it was a small thing, passed hand to hand by the people who had said, weeks ago, that something looked off about the cut and had been buried for saying it. But those people had been waiting the way Renn had been waiting, and when the whole footage arrived they did not need to be told how to feel, which is exactly why it could not be stopped. Each person who watched it saw the girl for themselves, saw the guard see her, saw him drop the rifle, and a truth you discover for yourself, with your own eyes and your own body, is heavier at last than any comfortable lie, because no one handed it to you, and so no one can take it away. By the second day, the whole country was watching the 4 seconds it had somehow watched 20 million times and never seen. The same news programs that had played Devlin's 2 seconds and asked grave questions now played mine and asked different ones. The politician who had called for an inquiry into the guards found a reason to be traveling. The newspaper that had run my thumbnail under a headline about a monarchy out of touch ran, instead, a single frame from the raw footage, the guard's back bent over the falling steel, the child's small hands leaving the chain, and above it one word, which was the guard's name, which the country had spent 3 weeks not bothering to learn, Renn. And the lie, having been fast, discovered the other property of fast things, which is that they cannot stop. Every share Devlin's video had ever gotten was now a share of a thing that had been proven false to the person who shared it. Every one of the 40,000 red shirts that said statues was now a thing its owner could not be seen wearing. The sponsorship that had turned him down twice and then, at the height of the lie, said yes, unsaid it within a day, and said it in public, and made sure everyone knew it had. The stadium that had booked his 10 million celebration canceled the event in light of new information, which is the language money uses when it is running for the exits. Devlin fought it, of course. He knew the machine better than anyone. It was his machine. He put out the tearful response he'd prepared, then a second, angrier one, then a third that blamed a disgruntled former employee, me, for a malicious edit, not understanding, or pretending not to understand, that the whole point of what I had released was that it was the one thing in this entire story that had never been edited at all. He demanded I be discredited. He hired the lawyers I had known he would hire. But there is no lawyer for a raw camera file, and there is no spin for a country that has watched, with its own eyes, a man drop his weapon to catch a falling child and then be called a brute for it by the man who nearly dropped the steel on her. The machine that had made Devlin Marsh had exactly one fuel, and the fuel was the audience's belief that he was fearless, and the people he ambushed were fair game, and both halves of that belief died in the same 4 seconds. Within a month his 9 million was falling by the 100,000 a day. Within 3 the channel was gone, the merchandise a liability, the management company's website scrubbed of his name. The countdown clock in his office never reached 10 million. He had wanted to be unforgettable. He got his wish, in the one form he had never imagined. The country remembered him exactly and precisely and forever as the man who tried to break a guard and broke himself on the truth instead. I do not know where Devlin Marsh is now, and I have made my peace with not knowing. He was never punished the way people wanted him punished, and King Alaric's card above my screen is the reason I am glad of it. We did not do to him what he did to Renn. We showed the country what happened, and the country decided, and that is a slower and cleaner justice than the machines, and it is the only kind that leaves you able to look at yourself afterward. The law had its own quiet word with him about an unrigged crane over a public crowd and a 6-year-old child. That part was not mine to tell, and I have kept it that way. What I know is that the lie that was going to make him is the thing that unmade him, because he had built his whole life on the belief that you can film a true thing and make it mean whatever you want. And he was right about that for 2 years and about 9 million people, and then he was wrong about it, once, in front of the one man who would not help him by reacting. Guardsman Tobias Renn went back to his post. That was all he wanted. The inquiry cleared him completely. The dropped rifle, which could have broken him, was entered in the record not as a failure of discipline but as its highest expression. A guardsman who understood that the whole purpose of standing still is to be able to move, without hesitation, and at any cost to himself, in the one instant when standing still would be a sin. Crown Prince Rowan asked him in front of the inquiry whether there was anything the house could do for him, any honor, any advancement, and Renn said that he would like to be returned to the near post on the forecourt, the same post, the one he had held on the 4th of the month, because a guard who is moved after trouble looks like a guard who did wrong, and he had done no wrong. So they returned him to it. On the morning he took it up again, the crowd at the black iron fence was larger than any I had ever filmed there, and not one phone was up to catch him break, because the whole country now knew there was nothing in him that broke, and had come, instead, to stand for a while near a man who would not. I was there that morning, at the edge of the crowd, where I have always done my best watching. I had not expected him to know me in that press of people. But at one point in the long still hours of his post his eyes came off his horizon for the briefest instant and found me, the way they had once found me across the chain, and this time there was no sorrow in them and no accusation, only a small, grave acknowledgment, one professional to another, of a debt strangely settled. He had trusted that whoever saw the whole of it would find they could not carry only the end. And 11 days too late, and at the cost of everything I thought I wanted. had proven him right. Then his eyes went back to the horizon, where they belonged, and I understood I had been dismissed in the kindest possible way, and I left him to his post. I do not work in the machine anymore. I could not after that. You cannot spend your days making comfortable lies heavier than true things once you have watched a true thing, told plainly, bury the biggest lie in the country. I do a quieter work now. When some ordinary person is being made to mean something they did not do, a waiter, a nurse, a stranger frozen in an eighth of a second and sold to millions as a villain, people bring me the footage, all of it, the raw and the unlovely and the complete, and I do for them what I did for Renn. I find the minute on either side of the 2 seconds and I let the whole of it run, and I circle, once and quietly, the thing the cameras were not watching. It does not always win. The lie is still faster. But it wins more than the comfortable people believe it can, because there is always, somewhere, a person who has seen the whole of it and cannot carry only the end, and my work is only to be there when they finally decide to become brave. People ask me, when they learn I was the one who cut both videos, what changed? They mean the country, I think, how the whole feeling of a nation about its guards turned in a month, how a man they had been taught to jeer at became a man they crossed the city to stand near, how a jaunty little sting under a punchline stopped being funny the day the country learned what it had been laid over. And all of that changed, and it is true, and it is the answer they want. But it is not the answer that is true for me. What changed for me was smaller, and it was everything. I had spent 2 years believing that the camera belonged to whoever was cleverest at cutting it, that a true thing was only raw material, that dignity was funny when you took it from someone who couldn't take it back. And then I stood on a cold forecourt and watched a man refuse, for 3 weeks, to give a cruel machine a single frame it could use, and I watched him drop the one thing that made him powerful to catch a child he did not know, and I watched him stand in silence for 11 days rather than defend a name he thought was worth less than the truth arriving in its own time. And he was right, and I had been wrong about every single thing. And the proof of how wrong I had been was sitting on a drive in a dull folder on my own desk the entire time. An influencer crossed the line with the Royal Guard, and he was so certain the man in red was the mark that it never once occurred to him he was the one being filmed. He thought discipline was a weakness he could game. It turned out to be the one thing in the whole country his machine could not eat, because a man who will not react cannot be made to mean anything but what he is. And what Tobias Renn was, under the red wool and the tall black fur and the flawless, infuriating, unbreakable stillness, was simply, entirely, a man who would drop everything he had to keep a stranger's child safe, and then stand quietly and let the truth take its time. Everything changed. It changed for the guard, who got his post back and his name known and his honor made plain. It changed for the man who thought dignity was a joke and learned in front of a whole country that it is the one thing that does not break. And it changed for me, the woman with the second camera, the one who was always watching the edges, because I had spent my life deciding what the world would be allowed to see, and a man who never said a word taught me at last the only thing worth deciding, to show the whole of it and to trust the truth to be heavier, and to be brave enough, even 11 days too late, to be there when it finally is.